Robert Hayes thought he was simply seeking shelter from the mountain storm when he spotted the mansion through the trees. What he found was a house frozen in time, abandoned for decades with bullet holes scarring the walls and bloodstains that never quite washed away. The Torrino family had vanished overnight 20 years ago, leaving behind a fortune and countless enemies. As Robert explored the dusty rooms, he discovered safes welded shut, hidden passages, and evidence of something far more sinister than organized crime. But the most chilling discovery came when he found the basement room that revealed the true reason the family disappeared. What happened to the money, the witnesses, and the one family member who was never found? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The storm had been building for hours, turning what should have been a peaceful afternoon hike into something far more treacherous. Robert Hayes pulled his weatherproof jacket tighter against the wind and checked his storm-damaged trail map one more time. The paper was soaked, the ink bleeding into illegible smudges, but he could still make out the general direction back to his truck. 23 years of wilderness photography had taught him to respect the mountains, and right now every instinct told him to find shelter fast. At 58, Robert moved with the deliberate pace of a man who understood that rushing in rough terrain was how people got hurt. His graying beard was damp with mist, and his experienced eyes scanned the forest for any sign of refuge. The wind howled through the pines, bending them at angles that made him wince. This wasn't just a passing shower. This was the kind of storm that turned hiking trails into rivers and transformed familiar landmarks into unrecognizable terrain. He'd been documenting the changing seasons in these Montana mountains for the better part of 2 decades. Ever since his divorce had left him searching for something that made sense. Photography had always been his refuge, the one thing that remained constant when everything else in his life shifted like sand. Through his lens, he'd captured the raw beauty of places most people would never see, the quiet moments when nature revealed its deeper truths. But today, nature was showing a different face entirely. The first glimpse of the mansion came through a gap in the trees, and Robert stopped so abruptly that he nearly lost his footing on the muddy trail. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Massive stone walls rose from the forest floor like something out of a Gothic novel, completely incongruous with the wild Montana landscape. The structure was enormous, easily 3 stories tall, with elaborate stonework that spoke of wealth beyond anything he'd ever encountered in these remote mountains. Robert approached cautiously, his photographer's instincts kicking in despite the urgency of the storm. The mansion sat in a clearing that must have been carefully maintained at one time, though now it was overgrown with weeds and saplings. Ivy crawled up the walls in thick tendrils, and several windows on the upper floors were broken, their glass scattered across what had once been manicured grounds. The front entrance was a massive oak door set beneath a stone archway that wouldn't have looked out of place on a European cathedral. But it was the details that made Robert's breath catch. The door frame was riddled with what could only be bullet holes, deep gouges in the wood that spoke of violence unleashed with automatic weapons. Dark stains marked the stone steps, stains that time and weather had faded but never quite erased. His hands moved instinctively to his camera, muscle memory taking over, even as his rational mind processed the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't just an abandoned building. This was a crime scene, preserved by isolation and the simple fact that no one had reason to venture this deep into the wilderness. Robert tested the front door and found it unlocked. The heavy oak swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty halls beyond. The smell hit him immediately, dust, mildew, and something else. Something that reminded him of old meat left too long in the sun. He pulled a small flashlight from his pack and stepped inside. The entry hall was magnificent, even in decay. A crystal chandelier hung from a ceiling, painted with elaborate frescoes, though many of the crystals had fallen and lay scattered across the marble floor like frozen tears. Twin staircases curved up to a second-floor landing, their banisters carved from what looked like mahogany. But here, too, the signs of violence were unmistakable. The walls were pocked with bullet holes, and dark stains marked the marble in patterns that suggested bodies had fallen and bled out where they lay. Robert moved deeper into the mansion, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. To his left, a formal dining room contained a table that could easily seat 20, set with fine china that was now covered in decades of dust. The chairs were pushed back from the table at odd angles, as if the diners had stood abruptly and never returned. Place settings remained exactly as they'd been left, complete with cloth napkins that had yellowed with age. The kitchen was a marvel of 1990s excess, with commercial-grade appliances and granite countertops that probably cost more than most people's houses. But even here, the evidence of sudden departure was obvious. Pots and pans were scattered across the floor, and the contents of drawers had been dumped out as if someone had been searching frantically for something. It was in the formal living room that Robert found the family portrait. The massive oil painting dominated one wall, showing a family of 5 posed in the classical style of old money. The patriarch was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of confident smile that came from absolute power. Beside him sat an elegant woman with kind eyes and perfectly styled black hair. 3 children completed the group, 2 older boys who looked to be in their 20s, and a younger son who couldn't have been more than 16. A brass nameplate at the bottom of the frame read, "The Torrino Family, 1998. Robert stared at the painting for a long moment, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. He'd heard the name Torrino before, whispered in the kind of conversations that happened in small mountain towns when people thought no one was listening. Stories about organized crime, about families that had more money than could ever be explained by legitimate business, about people who disappeared without warning and were never seen again. Thunder crashed overhead, loud enough to rattle the windows and remind Robert why he'd sought shelter in the first place. But the storm outside seemed insignificant compared to the storm of questions building in his mind. What had happened to this family? Why had they abandoned a mansion that must have been worth millions? And why were the signs of violence so obvious, yet apparently never investigated? He pulled out his satellite phone and checked for a signal. 2 bars, enough to make a call if he needed to. Robert had always been a cautious man, and 23 years of hiking alone had taught him the value of letting someone know where he was. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for Detective Sarah Chen with the state police. They'd met 3 years ago when Robert had discovered evidence of illegal hunting in a remote area, and she'd proven to be both competent and trustworthy. "Chen here. Sarah, it's Robert Hayes. I need to report something unusual." "Robert? Where are you calling from? You sound like you're in a tunnel." "I'm using the satellite phone. I'm about 15 miles northeast of Bear Creek. Took shelter from the storm in what appears to be an abandoned mansion."
"Sarah, this place..."
"It looks like a crime scene. A big one." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Describe what you're seeing." Robert moved back to the entry hall, playing his flashlight across the bullet holes and bloodstains. Massive stone mansion, probably built in the 80s or 90s. Bullet holes everywhere, bloodstains on the marble floors. There's a family portrait dated 1998 with the name Torrino. The silence that followed stretched so long that Robert thought he'd lost the connection. "Sarah, you still there?" "I'm here." "Robert, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch anything else. Do not go into any other rooms. The Torrino case is complicated. I'm going to need you to stay put until I can get there, but that won't be until this storm passes." "What do you mean, complicated?" "The Torrino family disappeared 20 years ago. 5 people vanished overnight. It was federal jurisdiction. FBI took over the investigation. The case was never officially closed, but it went cold fast. No bodies were ever found, no arrests were ever made. Most people assumed they were relocated by witness protection or eliminated by rivals. Robert felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. 5 people. But there were only 4 in the family portrait I found. No, there were 5. Giuseppe Torrino, his wife Maria, and 3 sons. Antonio, Marco, and Vincent. Vincent was the youngest, maybe 17 when they disappeared. Robert moved back to the living room and shone his light on the portrait again. 3 sons, but the nameplate only mentioned the family name, not individual members. Had Vincent been left out of this formal portrait for some reason? Sarah, how certain are you about the timeline? This portrait is dated 1998. The family disappeared in March of 2003. They lived in this area, owned several legitimate businesses, but everyone knew they were connected to organized crime. The FBI had been building a case against them for years. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak intensity. Wind howled around the mansion with enough force to rattle the massive stone walls, and Robert could hear trees crashing down in the forest beyond. He wasn't going anywhere tonight, which meant he had hours to explore this frozen moment in time. Sarah, I'm going to be stuck here until morning at least. This storm isn't letting up, and I'm not hiking out in the dark through fallen trees. Just be careful, okay? That place has a history. People have reported strange things over the years. Lights in the windows, sounds of voices. Most folks around here think it's haunted. Robert smiled grimly. I don't believe in ghosts, Sarah, but I'm starting to think this place might be haunted by something worse than spirits. After ending the call, Robert settled into what had once been a library, complete with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. The books were mostly classics, leather-bound volumes that spoke of education and culture, but mixed among them were titles that made him raise an eyebrow. Books on tax law, international finance, and offshore banking. The reading material of a man who needed to understand how to move large amounts of money without attracting attention. He found a chair that wasn't too badly damaged and sat down to wait out the storm, his mind churning with questions. The Torrino family had lived here, in this isolated mansion, probably believing their wealth and connections made them untouchable. But something had gone wrong, something violent and final. The evidence was written in bullet holes and bloodstains throughout their beautiful home, and yet Detective Chen had said no bodies were ever found, which raised the most disturbing question of all. If the family hadn't died here, where had they gone? And why did it look like they'd left in the middle of a war zone? The storm raged through the night, but Robert found sleep impossible. Every creak of the old mansion, every whistle of wind through broken windows, seemed to carry whispers of the violence that had occurred here. He dozed fitfully in the library chair, his camera bag clutched protectively in his lap, waiting for dawn to reveal more of the mansion's secrets. As grey morning light filtered through the tall windows, Robert began a more systematic exploration. The second floor revealed bedrooms that told individual stories of interrupted lives. The master suite was opulent beyond anything he'd ever seen, with a bed large enough for 4 people and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. But here too the signs of hasty departure were obvious. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied, and the massive walk-in closet was half empty, as if someone had grabbed only the most essential items. It was in Giuseppe Torrino's private study that Robert made his first real discovery. Hidden behind a bookshelf that swung open on well-oiled hinges, he found a small room that had clearly been designed as a private sanctuary. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and a heavy oak desk dominated the center of the space. But it was what lay open on that desk that made Robert's blood run cold, a leather-bound ledger, its pages thick with columns of numbers and coded notations, lay open as if someone had been interrupted in the middle of working. The leather cover was stained with something dark that had dried to a rusty brown color. Blood. Robert was certain of it. The pages themselves were filled with meticulous handwriting in what appeared to be a mixture of English and Italian. recording transactions that involved enormous sums of money. Robert photographed each page carefully, his trained eye catching details that might prove important later. The entries seemed to follow a pattern: dates, initials, amounts, and location codes. Some amounts were in the hundreds of thousands, others reached into the millions. This wasn't the accounting ledger of a legitimate business. This was the financial record of a criminal empire. As he worked, Robert became aware of something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The last entries in the ledger were dated March 15th, 2003, just days before the family had disappeared, according to Detective Chen. But more disturbing was the fact that there were fresh crumbs on the desk beside the ledger. Someone had been eating here recently within the last few days. Robert backed out of the hidden study and quickly surveyed the rest of the second floor. In what had been the youngest son's bedroom, Vincent's room, based on the sports trophies and teenage posters still on the walls, he found more evidence of recent activity. The bed had been slept in, and there were modern supplies stacked neatly in one corner: canned food, bottled water, and a camping lantern that looked like it had been purchased within the last year. Someone was living in this mansion. Someone who had access to the family's most private spaces and wasn't afraid of the violent history that soaked into every stone of the building. Robert's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call. Detective Chen's number appeared on the display. "Robert, thank God. I was worried when I couldn't reach you last night. How did you weather the storm?" "Fine, but Sarah, we have a problem. Someone else has been here recently. There are fresh supplies, evidence that someone's been using the mansion as a base of operations." "That's not possible. The place has been sealed off for 20 years. Nobody goes up there." "Well, somebody's been going up there. And they've been accessing areas that weren't part of any official investigation. I found Giuseppe Torrino's private study behind a hidden panel. There's a bloody ledger with financial records, and the last entries are from March 2003. The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Sarah, you still there?" "I'm here." "Robert, I need you to get out of there now. Don't wait for me. Don't explore anymore. Pack up and hike out immediately. What aren't you telling me? What's got you so spooked?" "The Torrino case. It's not as cold as I led you to believe. There have been developments over the years. People who got too close to that family's business have had a tendency to disappear. Not officially, you understand. No missing person reports, no investigations. They just stop being seen around." Robert felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain morning. "Are you saying you think the people responsible for the family's disappearance are still active?" "I'm saying that mansion sits at the center of something bigger than a 20-year-old missing persons case. And if someone's been using it as a base, that means they don't want it found. Which means they definitely don't want witnesses." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert heard the sound of vehicles approaching through the forest. Multiple engines, moving slowly but steadily up what must be a hidden access road. His photographer's instincts kicked in, and he moved to a second-floor window that offered a view of the mansion's rear approach. 3 black SUVs emerged from the tree line, moving in formation like a military convoy. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, and Robert watched as armed men emerged from each vehicle. Professional-looking individuals dressed in tactical gear, carrying weapons that were definitely not standard hunting rifles. "Sarah, we have visitors. Armed men, multiple vehicles. I count at least 6 individuals, possibly more. Get out of there, Robert. Use the front entrance and head into the forest on the opposite side from where they approached. I'm dispatching units, but it'll take hours for them to reach you." Robert was already moving, grabbing his camera bag and heading for the main staircase. But as he reached the entry hall, he heard voices outside the front door. They'd surrounded the mansion. "Too late," he whispered into the phone. "They're at all the entrances." Through the front windows, Robert could see a man who was clearly the leader of the group. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident bearing that came from being accustomed to absolute authority. The man was speaking into a radio, coordinating his team with military precision. "Sarah, I'm trapped. They have the place surrounded. Find somewhere to hide. Somewhere they won't think to look." And whatever you do, don't let them know you found that ledger. Robert clicked off the phone and looked around desperately. The mansion was enormous, but most of the obvious hiding places would be searched systematically by professionals. He needed somewhere unexpected, somewhere that would give him both concealment and a way to document what was happening. The answer came to him as he remembered the layout of the hidden study. If Giuseppe Torrino had built one secret room, there might be others. Robert raced back upstairs and into the study, searching the walls for any other concealed panels. His fingers found a section of seemingly solid wall that gave slightly when pressed. Another hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow space between the walls that ran the length of the mansion. As Robert squeezed into the cramped passage, he heard the front door being kicked open with tremendous force. Voices echoed through the mansion, speaking in accented English that confirmed his worst fears. These weren't local criminals or even federal agents. These were professionals, probably foreign nationals, and they were searching for something specific. From his hiding place, Robert could hear them moving through the rooms below, conducting what sounded like a methodical search. They knew the mansion's layout, knew where to look, and they were looking for something particular. The question was whether they were searching for evidence the family had left behind, or for signs that someone else had been here recently. The answer came when he heard the leader's voice, speaking clearly into his radio. "The study has been accessed. Someone found the ledger. We need to locate them before they can report what they've seen." Robert pressed himself deeper into the hidden space, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain they would hear it. 20 years after the Torrino family's disappearance, their secrets were still worth killing for. And he had stumbled into the middle of a game whose rules he didn't understand and whose players had already proven they would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Outside his hiding place, the search was becoming more systematic, more urgent. They knew he was here, and they weren't planning to let him leave. The hours that followed were the longest of Robert's life. From his cramped hiding space between the walls, he could hear the search team moving through the mansion with methodical precision. They weren't just looking for him. They were conducting what sounded like a complete inventory of the building's contents. Voices drifted up through the old ventilation system, speaking in a mixture of English and what sounded like Russian. Through a crack in the wall paneling, Robert managed to position his camera and capture images of the search team. The leader was indeed the silver-haired man he'd seen outside, someone who moved with the authority of a military commander. The others deferred to him completely, calling him Colonel in heavily accented English. These weren't common criminals. These were professionals, possibly former military or intelligence operatives. As the afternoon wore on, Robert began to understand the scope of what he'd stumbled into. The team wasn't just searching for him, they were removing evidence. He watched through his hidden vantage point as they carried out boxes of documents, computer equipment, and what appeared to be surveillance gear. The mansion hadn't just been the Torrino family home. It had been some kind of operations center, and these people had been using it for purposes that went far beyond simple criminal activity. When the search team finally departed as darkness fell, Robert waited another 2 hours before emerging from his hiding place. His body ached from being cramped in the narrow space, but his mind was racing with the implications of what he'd witnessed. He immediately tried to call Detective Chen, but his satellite phone showed no signal. The searchers had left behind some kind of jamming equipment. Robert spent the night documenting everything he could find that the search team had missed. In Vincent Torrino's bedroom, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, he discovered a handwritten journal. The pages were filled with entries in Italian, written in a young man's careful script. Even without being able to read the language fluently, Robert could sense the growing fear and desperation in the increasingly erratic handwriting. Using his camera's translation app, Robert managed to decode portions of the journal. Vincent had been documenting his family's activities in the weeks before their disappearance, and what he recorded painted a picture of a family under siege. References to federal agents watching the house, Papa meeting with dangerous men, and Maria crying in her room every night filled the pages, but it was the final entry that made Robert's blood run cold. Written in shaky English, as if Vincent had wanted to ensure it would be understood by anyone who found it. They know about the FBI. Papa says we have to run tonight. But I think it's too late. I think they're already here. The journal was dated March 20th, 2003, 5 days after the last entry in the bloody ledger. As dawn broke on his second day in the mansion, Robert heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. His heart leaped, thinking it might be law enforcement responding to Detective Chen's call. But as the aircraft circled the mansion, he realized it was conducting a surveillance pattern, not preparing to land. Someone was watching, waiting to see if he would emerge. Robert retreated to the hidden study and used the landline phone he'd discovered there. Amazingly, the line was still active. He dialed Detective Chen's direct number. "Chen here. Sarah, it's Robert. Don't ask me how I'm calling. Just listen. The people who were here yesterday, they're not gone. They've got surveillance on the mansion. Helicopter, probably ground units. And I found something that changes everything. Robert, thank God you're alive. I've been trying to reach you for 18 hours. What did you find? Vincent Torrino's journal. Sarah, the family knew they were in immediate danger. The final entry talks about federal agents and having to run. But here's the thing. Vincent wrote that entry 5 days after the last entry in the financial ledger. That means someone survived the initial attack. The silence on Detective Chen's end was deafening. Sarah, Robert, I need to tell you something. I've been doing research since we last spoke, calling in favors, accessing files that have been buried for 20 years. The Torrino case wasn't just federal jurisdiction. It was classified. National security level classification. What does that mean? It means the FBI wasn't just investigating organized crime. They were investigating something that threatened national security, and Vincent Torrino wasn't just a victim. According to sealed federal records, he was a cooperating witness. Robert felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a picture he didn't like. You're saying Vincent was working with the FBI against his own family? That's exactly what I'm saying. And if he survived the attack that eliminated the rest of his family, then he's been living under federal protection for 20 years, or he's been hiding, trying to stay alive long enough to complete whatever mission the FBI gave him. Robert, there's more. The financial records you photographed from that ledger, I had a forensic accountant take a preliminary look. Those aren't just organized crime transactions. They're arms deals, technology transfers, transactions involving foreign governments and terrorist organizations. The Torrino family wasn't just running drugs and illegal gambling. They were facilitating the sale of American military technology to hostile nations. The implications hit Robert like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a crime family that had disappeared 20 years ago. This was about ongoing national security threats, about weapons and technology that could still be in the wrong hands, about a federal witness who might be the only person alive who could provide evidence of treason at the highest levels. Sarah, I need to get out of here. But first, I need to find whatever Vincent left behind. If he was gathering evidence for the FBI, there has to be more than just his personal journal. Absolutely not. Robert, you need to find a way to signal for extraction. I'm coordinating with federal authorities, but it's going to take time. These people have resources, connections. They've been planning this for 20 years. Planning what? The final cleanup. Vincent Torrino has been a loose end for 2 decades. Someone finally decided it was time to tie up that loose end permanently. As if, summoned by their conversation, Robert heard vehicles approaching the mansion again. But this time they weren't trying to be subtle. Engines roared up the access road, and within minutes, the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood filled the air. They weren't conducting a careful search this time. They were conducting a demolition. Robert grabbed Vincent's journal and his camera equipment and headed for the basement. If the mansion was about to be destroyed, his only chance of survival was to find whatever hidden spaces the building might contain below ground level. The basement stairs were stone, leading down into a foundation that had been carved directly into the mountain bedrock. The basement was a revelation. What had appeared from above to be a simple storage area was actually a sophisticated bunker system. Multiple rooms, connected by reinforced passages, complete with independent ventilation, and what appeared to be blast-proof doors. The Torrino family had been prepared for war. In the largest of the basement rooms, Robert found what Vincent had left behind for whoever might someday come looking. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps, and diagrams that laid out a conspiracy spanning decades. Federal officials, foreign agents, arms dealers, and technology brokers were all connected by lines drawn in red ink. At the center of it all was a photograph of a man Robert had seen before, the silver-haired leader of yesterday's search team. Below the photograph was a name written in Vincent's careful handwriting. Colonel Marcus Volkov, SVR, the man who killed my family, SVR, Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. The people hunting Robert weren't just criminals or even American operatives gone rogue. They were foreign intelligence agents who'd been operating on American soil for decades, using the Torrino family's criminal network to facilitate the theft of military secrets. And Vincent Torrino, barely 17 when his family was murdered, had spent the last 20 years documenting their activities, gathering evidence, and preparing for the day when he could finally bring them to justice. The sound of explosions above told Robert that his time was running out. But as he photographed Vincent's evidence wall, he realized that he wasn't just documenting a cold case anymore. He was documenting an ongoing espionage operation that threatened national security on a scale he could barely comprehend. Whatever happened next, the truth about the Torrino family and the foreign agents who had destroyed them could not be allowed to die in the rubble of this mountain mansion. The explosions above grew more intense, and Robert realized that Colonel Volkov's team wasn't just searching for him anymore. They were systematically destroying the mansion to eliminate any evidence that might remain. Chunks of concrete and debris began falling through the basement ceiling, and the air filled with dust and smoke. But Vincent's underground bunker proved to be as well constructed as everything else the Torrino family had built. The reinforced walls and ceiling held against the assault above. Robert worked frantically to document Vincent's evidence wall, photographing every document, every connection, every piece of the conspiracy that the young man had spent 20 years assembling. The scope of the operation was staggering. Arms deals stretching back to the Cold War, technology transfers that had given hostile nations access to American military secrets, and a network of corrupted officials that reached into the highest levels of government. But it was a manila folder marked FBI surveillance files that contained the most damning evidence. Inside were declassified documents that Vincent had somehow obtained, showing that the federal investigation of his family had been compromised from the beginning. Agent Michael Torres, the FBI handler who was supposed to be protecting Vincent's identity as an informant, had been feeding information directly to Colonel Volkov. The betrayal had been complete and devastating. Vincent's family had been murdered not because they were criminals, but because they had been used as pawns in a larger game of espionage. And Vincent himself had survived only because he'd been away from the mansion on the night of the attack, meeting with FBI agents who thought they were keeping him safe. As Robert photographed the files, he found a handwritten note from Vincent addressed to whoever finds this room. The young man's words were haunting in their simplicity. I was 17 when they killed my family. I've spent every day since then gathering evidence to bring them to justice. If you are reading this, it probably means they have found me at last. Please don't let their sacrifice be meaningless. The sound of heavy machinery above indicated that Volkov's team had brought in specialized equipment to complete their demolition. But they were also taking their time, being thorough. That suggested they weren't certain whether Robert had found the basement bunker, which meant he still had time to plan his escape. Robert's satellite phone suddenly chirped with an incoming message. Detective Chen had somehow managed to get a text through. Federal extraction team en route. Underground passage exits north face of mountain. GPS coordinates attached. Vincent alive in protective custody. You have evidence they need. Vincent was alive. After 20 years of hiding, gathering evidence and living in constant fear, Vincent Torrino was finally working with federal authorities to bring down the conspiracy that had destroyed his family. And Robert's discovery of the mansion had somehow triggered the final phase of that decades-long investigation. But first, he had to survive long enough to deliver the evidence. Robert studied the basement layout more carefully and found what he was looking for. A narrow tunnel leading away from the main bunker complex. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, carved through solid rock and reinforced with steel supports. It led north, toward the coordinates Detective Chen had provided. As he prepared to enter the tunnel, Robert heard new voices above. These weren't the accented tones of Volkov's team. These were American voices, speaking with the crisp professionalism of federal agents. The extraction team had arrived, and a firefight was developing directly over his head. Robert crawled through the tunnel for what felt like hours, his camera equipment and Vincent's journal secured in his pack. The passage was a masterwork of engineering, maintaining a slight upward grade that eventually brought him to a concealed exit on the mountainside, nearly a mile from the mansion. When he finally emerged into daylight, the sight that greeted him was like something from a war movie. The mansion was engulfed in flames, black smoke rising into the clear mountain air. Helicopters circled overhead, and the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the forest. Robert could see figures moving through the trees, federal agents in tactical gear, engaged in a running battle with Volkov's team. Mr. Hayes. The voice behind him was calm, professional. Robert turned to find a woman in her 40s, wearing FBI tactical gear, her weapon lowered but ready. Agent Patricia Rivers, FBI. Detective Chen told us you'd found Vincent's evidence cache. Agent Rivers. Yes, I have photographs of everything, plus Vincent's personal journal. But how did you know about the tunnel? Vincent told us. He's been in protective custody for 3 days now, ever since our surveillance detected Volkov's team moving toward this area. Vincent built that tunnel system himself over the course of several years, using it to access the mansion without being detected by Volkov's surveillance. As they moved away from the mountain toward a staging area where federal vehicles waited, Agent Rivers explained the larger operation that was now unfolding. Vincent's evidence had finally given them what they needed to roll up Volkov's entire network. Arrest warrants had been issued for dozens of individuals, including several high-ranking government officials who had been compromised by Russian intelligence. But why now? Robert asked. Vincent's been gathering this evidence for 20 years. What changed? Technology, Rivers replied. Volkov's network has been transitioning to cyber operations, using new methods to steal military secrets and influence American policy. Vincent's evidence provides the historical context that proves it's all part of the same long-term operation. Without that historical continuity, we could only prosecute individual cybercrimes. With Vincent's evidence, we can prosecute the entire conspiracy as an ongoing act of espionage. At the federal staging area, Robert met the man who had been at the center of the mystery for 2 decades. Vincent Torrino looked older than his 37 years, worn down by decades of living in hiding and constantly looking over his shoulder. But his eyes held the same intelligence and determination that Robert had seen in the teenage face in the family portrait. Mr. Hayes, Vincent said, extending his hand. Agent Rivers tells me you found my evidence room. I had almost given up hope that anyone would ever discover what I'd assembled. Your family's story needed to be told, Robert replied. But I have to ask, how did you survive that night when the rest of your family didn't? Vincent's expression grew distant, haunted by memories that would never fully fade. I was supposed to be at the mansion that night, but Agent Torres called an emergency meeting. Said the FBI had intelligence about an imminent threat and needed to move our family into protective custody immediately. I was to meet him at a safe house 20 miles away while other agents secured my family. But Torres was working for Volkov. Exactly. The meeting was a setup to get me away from the mansion while Volkov's team eliminated the rest of my family. Torres planned to kill me at the safe house and make it look like I died with everyone else. But I got suspicious when he started asking detailed questions about our financial records and hidden assets. I managed to escape during a bathroom break, and you've been hiding ever since, hiding and investigating. I knew that if I came forward too soon, before I had enough evidence to expose the entire network, they'd just eliminate me and cover up the truth. I had to be patient, had to gather enough proof to make the case airtight. As they spoke, Agent Rivers received word that the firefight at the mansion was winding down. Most of Volkov's team had been captured or eliminated, though Volkov himself had escaped during the chaos. The mansion was a total loss, but Vincent's evidence had been preserved through Robert's photographs and the additional materials the FBI had been able to recover. What happens now? Robert asked. Now we prosecute the biggest espionage case in American history, Rivers replied. And we make sure that Giuseppe Torrino and his family are remembered not as criminals, but as patriots who died trying to protect their country from foreign infiltration. Vincent looked toward the smoke rising from his family's former home, his expression mixing grief and satisfaction. My father wasn't a perfect man, he said quietly. He got involved with dangerous people, made choices that put our family at risk. But when the FBI approached him about cooperating against foreign agents who were using our business connections, he didn't hesitate. He knew it might get us all killed. But he also knew it was the right thing to do. And now, 20 years later, his sacrifice is finally going to mean something, Robert observed. More than something, Vincent replied. It's going to mean everything. As federal agents continued their operations around the burning mansion, Robert realized that his peaceful wilderness photography expedition had led him into the center of a story that would reshape American understanding of foreign espionage operations. The photographs he'd taken would become evidence in a case that would protect national security for generations to come. But more than that, he'd helped bring justice to a family that had been willing to sacrifice everything for their country, even when that country hadn't been able to protect them from the consequences of their patriotism. The Torrino family's story wasn't ending in the ashes of their mountain mansion. It was beginning a new chapter, one that would ensure their sacrifice was never forgotten. 3 days later, Robert sat in a secure FBI conference room in Helena, watching as Vincent carefully examined a small electronic device that had been recovered from the mansion's basement. The device looked innocuous enough, about the size of a smartphone, but thicker, with an old-fashioned antenna and what appeared to be recording equipment built into one end. "This is it," Vincent said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is the wire I was wearing the night my family died." Agent Rivers leaned forward, her expression intense. "Are you certain?" "After 20 years, how can you be sure?" Vincent pointed to a small scratch on the device's casing. "I made that mark myself, the day before the attack. I was nervous about wearing a wire around my father's associates, so I scratched my initials into the case where I could feel them with my thumb. VT Vincent Torrino." Robert watched as FBI technicians connected the device to modern equipment, trying to recover whatever data might still be stored in its memory. The room was silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment and the soft clicking of computer keyboards. "Mr. Torrino," one of the technicians said, "the device still has power." The battery technology from that era was remarkably durable, and it appears the recording function never stopped running. "We're detecting approximately 47 hours of stored audio." Agent Rivers exchanged a look with her colleague, Agent Harrison. 47 hours? "Vincent, how long were you supposed to wear the device?" "Just for one evening, maybe 6 hours maximum. The plan was to record a meeting between my father and some Russian contacts. Then return the device to Agent Torres the next morning. But if the device recorded 47 hours of audio, and it was never returned to Torres, Agent Harrison began, then it recorded everything that happened after Vincent left the mansion, Robert finished. Including the attack itself. The implication hit everyone in the room simultaneously. For 20 years, the FBI had assumed that the Torrino family had been eliminated quickly and efficiently. Probably killed execution style before they knew what was happening. But if Vincent's recording device had captured nearly 2 full days of audio, including the attack, then the family might have survived the initial assault. "Play it," Vincent said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I need to know what happened to them." The first several hours of the recording were routine, family conversations, television in the background, the normal sounds of a household going about its evening activities. But at approximately 11:30 p.m. on March 20th, 2003, everything changed. The attack, when it came, was not the swift, professional execution they had expected. Instead, the audio revealed a prolonged siege. Giuseppe Torrino's voice could be heard shouting orders to his family, telling them to get to the safe room in the basement. Maria Torrino was crying, but her voice was strong as she helped coordinate their defense. The 2 older sons, Antonio and Marco, were clearly experienced with weapons, returning fire and buying time for the family to reach their prepared defensive positions. They fought, Vincent whispered, tears streaming down his face. They knew how to fight, but it was what happened next that provided the most shocking revelation of all. Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, a new voice could be heard on the recording. A voice Vincent recognized immediately. "Vincent, my boy, where are you? Your family needs you." Colonel Marcus Volkov, speaking perfect English with only the slightest trace of an accent. "He was there," Vincent said, his voice filled with amazement and horror. Volkov was personally leading the attack, but Volkov wasn't just leading an assassination. He was conducting an interrogation. For nearly 18 hours, the recording captured Volkov systematically questioning each member of the Torrino family about the location of evidence, the identity of other FBI informants, and the details of federal operations they might have learned about. "They didn't break," Agent Rivers observed, her voice filled with admiration. "Not one of them gave up any information that could have compromised other operations." The recording revealed that Giuseppe Torrino had been far more than just a cooperating witness. He had been an active intelligence asset, using his criminal connections to identify and monitor foreign agents operating within organized crime networks. Maria Torrino had been involved as well, using her role in several charity organizations to track financial transactions that might be connected to foreign intelligence operations. Even Antonio and Marco, the older sons, had been working with federal authorities, using their positions in the family business to gather intelligence on arms dealers and technology brokers who were selling American secrets to foreign governments. The entire family was working for the FBI, Robert said, the full scope of the tragedy finally becoming clear. They weren't criminals who decided to cooperate. They were patriots who agreed to maintain their criminal cover in order to protect national security. But the most devastating revelation came near the end of the recording, when Volkov's voice could be heard speaking to someone on a radio. "Torres, the situation is contained, but we have a problem. The youngest son wasn't here. Your intelligence was incomplete." Agent Torres's voice crackled through the radio, tinny but clearly audible. "Vincent Torrino was supposed to be eliminated with the others. His survival compromises the entire operation." "Then find him," Volkov replied. "And when you do, make sure he disappears permanently. No body, no evidence, no questions." The recording continued for several more hours, capturing Volkov's team as they systematically destroyed evidence and staged the scene to make it appear that the family had simply vanished. But they had kept the Torrino family alive during this process, forcing them to watch as their life's work was dismantled and their sacrifice was turned into a cover-up. They died knowing that their work would be covered up, Vincent said, his voice breaking. They died thinking their sacrifice meant nothing. Agent Rivers reached across the table and gently took Vincent's hand. But they were wrong. Your 20 years of investigation, combined with this recording, proves that their sacrifice meant everything. We now have direct evidence of the largest foreign intelligence operation ever conducted on American soil. The recording's final moments were almost too painful to hear. Giuseppe Torrino's voice, weakened but still defiant. Vincent, if you're listening to this someday, know that we died proud of what we accomplished. Don't let them win. As the recording ended, the conference room was silent, except for the sound of Vincent's quiet sobbing. But when he looked up, his eyes held a determination that Robert had seen before. In the evidence room, in the family portrait, in every document and photograph that had preserved the truth for 20 years. "Agent Rivers," Vincent said, wiping his eyes, "I want to testify. I want to tell the world what really happened to my family. And I want to make sure that Volkov and Torres and everyone else involved pays for what they did. Vincent, you understand that going public will put you in extreme danger. Volkov escaped 3 days ago, and he has resources all over the world. Once your identity becomes known, you'll never be truly safe again." Vincent looked around the room, his gaze settling on Robert. "Mr. Hayes risked his life to find the truth about my family. The least I can do is risk mine to make sure that truth is heard." Robert felt a deep respect for the young man who had spent his entire adult life seeking justice for his murdered family. "Vincent, if you're going to tell this story, you should tell it right. Let me help you document everything properly. The world needs to see the evidence, not just hear about it. You do that? Your family's story deserves to be told with the same care and attention they put into serving their country. It's the least I can do." As the FBI team prepared to brief senior officials on the explosive revelations contained in Vincent's recording device, Robert realized that his role in this story was far from over. He had stumbled into a 20-year-old mystery while seeking shelter from a storm. But now he was part of something much larger, a fight for truth, justice, and the memory of a family that had given everything for their country. The next 72 hours transformed Robert's understanding of both government operations and personal courage. Working alongside Vincent and a team of federal investigators, he helped piece together not just what had happened to the Torrino family, but what was still happening in the ongoing espionage operation that had claimed their lives. The breakthrough came when Agent Rivers presented them with a folder of crime scene photographs from the original investigation, images that had been classified for 20 years and were only now being declassified in light of Vincent's evidence. Robert spread the photographs across the conference table, using his professional photographer's eye to analyze details that previous investigators had missed. "Look at the blood spatter patterns," Robert said, pointing to several images of the mansion's main floor. "These don't match what we heard on the recording." According to the audio, the family made it to the basement safe room and held out there for hours. But these photos show evidence of violence throughout the main living areas. Vincent studied the photographs intently, his face growing pale as he recognized rooms where he had grown up. "Something's wrong here. This dining room photo shows overturned chairs and blood on the walls, but on the recording, you can hear my mother coordinating the family's movement to the basement. She wouldn't have been in the dining room during the attack." Agent Rivers called in the FBI's forensic photography specialist, Dr. Margaret Whitmore, who had worked the original Torrino case 20 years earlier. Dr. Whitmore arrived within hours, carrying boxes of additional evidence that had been stored in federal archives. "I always suspected there were inconsistencies in the original crime scene," Dr. Whitmore explained as she laid out additional photographs and forensic reports. "But Agent Torres controlled access to the scene, and he limited our investigation to just 6 hours before declaring the site compromised and sealing it off." Torres was covering up evidence even then, Vincent said bitterly. More than that, Dr. Whitmore replied. I think Torres staged additional evidence to support the story that your family had been killed quickly and their bodies removed. Look at these blood samples. She pulled out a laboratory report from 2003. We found blood from all 5 family members throughout the house, but the patterns didn't make sense. Too much blood in some areas, not enough in others. Robert examined the forensic photos with his photographer's trained eye for detail and lighting. Dr. Whitmore, were you able to photograph the basement area where the family actually made their stand? That's just it. Torres wouldn't let us access the basement. He claimed it was structurally unsafe after the attack. But now, I think he was protecting evidence that would have contradicted his version of events. Vincent was studying a photograph of his father's study when he suddenly looked up with excitement. I know how to prove Torres was involved in staging the scene. My father had a security camera system that he thought no one else knew about. Hidden cameras in every room, recording to a central server in the basement. Agent Rivers leaned forward. Vincent, if there's video evidence, the server was military grade, designed to survive almost anything. If it's still there, if Volkov's team didn't find it when they destroyed the mansion, we'd have video proof of exactly what happened. Within hours, a federal recovery team was dispatched to the ruins of the Torrino mansion. Using ground-penetrating radar and specialized excavation equipment, they located the basement server room that had been buried under tons of debris when Volkov's team destroyed the building. Robert accompanied the recovery team, documenting the excavation process with his camera. The server room had been built like a bank vault, with reinforced concrete walls and a blast-proof door that had protected the interior from the explosion that destroyed the rest of the basement. We've got power, one of the technicians called out as they connected portable generators to the buried server system. And we've got data. 20 years worth of continuous recording, right up until the power grid was cut 3 days ago. The video evidence was devastating. Camera after camera showed Agent Torres arriving at the mansion 2 hours before Volkov's attack, using his FBI credentials to gain entry and plant evidence throughout the house. The footage showed him spreading blood samples, overturning furniture, and creating the false crime scene that had misled investigators for 20 years. But the most damning evidence came from cameras that had captured the actual attack. The Torrino family had indeed fought heroically, using prepared defensive positions and coordinated tactics that suggested extensive training. They had held off Volkov's assault team for nearly 6 hours before being forced to surrender when the attackers threatened to burn down the mansion with them inside. They were military trained. Dr. Whitmore observed as they watched Giuseppe Torrino directing his family's defense. This wasn't a crime family under attack. This was a trained intelligence unit conducting a fighting withdrawal. The video also revealed something that the audio recording had not captured. Clearly, the presence of additional FBI agents working with Torres to facilitate the attack. At least 3 other federal agents could be seen on camera, coordinating with Volkov's team and helping to stage the false evidence. It wasn't just Torres, Agent Rivers said grimly. This was a conspiracy involving multiple federal agents, possibly reaching into the highest levels of the Bureau. But Vincent was focused on different footage, cameras that had captured his parents' final hours. Despite everything they had endured, Giuseppe and Maria Torrino had used their last moments to hide additional evidence that could expose the full scope of the conspiracy. They knew they were going to die, Vincent said, his voice filled with admiration and grief. But they used that time to make sure the truth would survive them. The footage showed Giuseppe hiding documents inside the walls, Maria encoding messages in what appeared to be random scratches on metal surfaces, and both parents working together to ensure that evidence of their true mission would survive, even if they didn't. Your parents were remarkable people, Robert said quietly. They turned their final hours into one last intelligence operation. As the federal team prepared to act on the new evidence, Vincent asked Robert to help him with one final task. Together, they returned to the ruins of the mansion, not as investigators this time, but as family members paying their respects. "I need to say goodbye," Vincent explained as they stood where the front entrance had once been. "I've spent 20 years focused on justice and revenge. I need to spend some time just remembering them as my family." Robert documented Vincent's quiet memorial service with his camera, capturing images that showed not just the destruction of the mansion, but the enduring love of a son for the family that had sacrificed everything to protect their country. As they prepared to leave the site, Vincent's satellite phone rang with an urgent call from Agent Rivers. "Vincent, we have a problem. The evidence you've provided has triggered something bigger than we expected. 3 federal judges have issued arrest warrants for over 40 individuals, including sitting congressmen and senior military officials. But Volkov's network has been monitoring our communications. They know we're closing in, and they're preparing to eliminate all remaining witnesses. What does that mean for us?" "It means you're no longer just a witness, Vincent. You're the primary target of a desperate conspiracy that will do anything to prevent this evidence from becoming public. And Mr. Hayes, since you've been working with Vincent to document this evidence, you're a target too." Robert felt a chill as he realized that his role in this story had evolved from accidental witness to active participant in a fight for survival. But looking at Vincent, seeing the determination in the young man's eyes, he knew there was only one choice to make. "What do you need us to do?" "Survive long enough for us to arrest the people responsible. But that may be harder than it sounds. Volkov is still at large, and he has resources we're only beginning to understand. The next 48 hours are going to determine whether this conspiracy is exposed, or whether it succeeds in silencing everyone who threatens it." As they drove away from the ruins of the Torrino mansion, Robert realized that the story he had stumbled into was far from over. The climax was still ahead of them, and the stakes had never been higher. The safe house was a nondescript cabin 20 miles from the mansion site, hidden in a valley that provided natural cover from surveillance. But as Vincent and Robert settled in for what Agent Rivers had promised would be a brief stay while federal marshals coordinated arrests, both men felt the weight of being hunted by people with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. "Vincent," Robert said as they reviewed the security footage one more time, "there's something I need to ask you. In all the evidence you've gathered over 20 years, did you ever find out why your family was specifically targeted? Why the Russians chose the Torrinos instead of some other crime family?" Vincent looked up from the laptop where he'd been organizing digital files. "I think I know, but I was never able to prove it. My father wasn't just cooperating with the FBI, he was actively recruiting other crime families to work against foreign intelligence operations. The Russians didn't just want to eliminate one informant, they wanted to send a message that would terrify anyone else who might consider cooperating with federal authorities. A message written in blood, exactly. Kill one family in a way that was both brutal and mysterious, and every other criminal in the country would think twice before talking to federal agents. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert's satellite phone. Agent Rivers was calling with news that made both men's blood run cold. "Vincent, Robert, we have a problem. 3 of our federal marshals were found dead an hour ago. Volkov's team isn't just trying to escape anymore. They're hunting anyone connected to this case. Where are you?" Vincent asked. "En route to your location with a full tactical team. But we're not going to make it in time. Our communications have been compromised, and Volkov knows where you are. You need to evacuate immediately." Robert was already moving toward the window, scanning the tree line for any sign of approaching vehicles. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less. There's a fallback position 2 miles northeast of your current location. GPS coordinates are in the emergency folder on Vincent's laptop. Get there, and we'll extract you as soon as we can secure the area." As Vincent grabbed the laptop and his evidence files, Robert heard the sound that confirmed their worst fears: helicopters approaching from multiple directions. But these weren't the controlled formations of federal aircraft. These were the aggressive, low-altitude attack patterns of people who weren't concerned about following regulations or avoiding civilian casualties. "Vincent, we need to go, now!" They burst out of the cabin's back door, just as the first helicopter crested the ridge above them. Robert caught a glimpse of armed figures rappelling from the aircraft before Vincent pulled him into the tree line. Behind them, the cabin erupted in automatic weapons fire as Volkov's team eliminated any possibility of evidence being left behind. The next 2 hours were the most harrowing of Robert's life, moving through dense forest while being hunted by professional killers, guided only by GPS coordinates and Vincent's knowledge of the terrain. They made their way toward the fallback position. But Vincent was carrying more than just evidence files. Hidden in his pack was something he hadn't told anyone about. Not even Agent Rivers. "Robert," Vincent said as they paused to catch their breath in a ravine that provided temporary concealment. "There's something else. Something I've been saving for 20 years. Vincent pulled out a small wooden box, carved with intricate designs that looked like they belonged in a museum. Inside, nestled in velvet padding, was a diamond the size of a golf ball, cut in an antique style that suggested it was centuries old. "The Torrino family diamond," Vincent explained. "It's been in our family for over 200 years, brought from Italy by my great-great-grandfather. But it's more than just a family heirloom. It's been used for decades to authenticate high-level communications between crime families and foreign intelligence services." Robert stared at the massive gem, understanding immediately why Vincent had kept its existence secret. "It's not just valuable. It's evidence. Every major transaction my family ever conducted with foreign agents was authenticated using this diamond. There are microscopic markings on its surface that prove it was present at dozens of meetings, arms deals, and intelligence exchanges. With the right equipment, forensic experts can match those markings to trace evidence found at crime scenes all over the world. So you've been carrying the key to proving the entire conspiracy, the key to proving everything, but also the one thing that Volkov absolutely cannot allow to reach federal authorities. As long as this diamond exists, there's physical proof that ties his intelligence operations directly to specific crimes." The sound of approaching vehicles made them both freeze. Through the trees, Robert could see black SUVs moving slowly along the forest road, their occupants scanning the woods with military precision. "They're tracking us," Vincent whispered. "Professional hunters, using techniques I recognize from my family's security training." But Vincent had learned more than just security techniques during his 20 years in hiding. He had studied his enemies, learned their methods, and prepared for exactly this situation. Leading Robert deeper into the forest, he brought them to what appeared to be a natural clearing, but was actually a carefully prepared, defensive position. "My father taught me that if you're going to make a stand, choose your ground carefully," Vincent explained as he revealed a cache of supplies and weapons that he had hidden years earlier. "This position gives us clear sightlines, multiple escape routes, and natural cover from aerial surveillance." As if summoned by their preparations, Colonel Marcus Volkov himself appeared at the edge of the clearing. The silver-haired man looked exactly as he had in the surveillance photos, but 20 years older and carrying the weight of decades spent looking over his shoulder. "Vincent Torrino," Volkov called out in accented English. "You have caused me considerable trouble over the years, but it ends today." Vincent stepped out from behind his cover, the family diamond clearly visible in his hand. "Colonel Volkov, you murdered my family 20 years ago. I've been waiting for this moment ever since. Your family chose to betray agreements that had been in place for decades. They accepted the consequences of that choice. They chose to serve their country instead of foreign enemies. Just like I'm choosing now." Robert watched the confrontation unfold, his camera documenting everything, even as his heart pounded with adrenaline. This wasn't just a personal vendetta between Vincent and Volkov. This was the final chapter of a story that had begun decades earlier, when American crime families had been infiltrated by foreign intelligence services. "Give me the diamond. Vincent and I will make your death quick. Continue to resist, and you will suffer as your family did." Vincent's response was to hold the diamond higher, where it caught the afternoon sunlight and threw rainbow patterns across the forest clearing. "This diamond has been present at every major intelligence operation you've conducted on American soil for the past 40 years. Every meeting, every arms deal, every act of treason. And now it's going to be the evidence that destroys your entire network." Volkov's face hardened with the realization that Vincent understood the full significance of what he carried. "You think your federal friends will protect you? Half of them work for me. The other half will be dead within hours. Maybe, but the evidence will survive. And that's all that matters." The firefight that followed was brief but intense. Volkov's team had superior numbers and equipment, but Vincent had chosen his position well. From concealed positions around the clearing, federal agents who had been tracking Volkov's team joined the battle, turning what should have been an execution into a coordinated law enforcement operation. When the shooting stopped, Volkov lay wounded but alive, his team either dead or captured. Vincent stood over the man who had destroyed his family, the diamond still clutched in his hand. "It's over," Vincent said quietly. 20 years, and it's finally over. Agent Rivers emerged from the tree line with a full tactical team, but her attention was focused on the diamond in Vincent's hand. "Vincent, is that what I think it is?" "The final piece of evidence. Everything we need to prove the entire conspiracy, going back 40 years. As federal agents secured the scene and began the process of documenting evidence, Robert realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the resolution of a 20-year-old mystery, but the triumph of patience, courage, and determination over seemingly impossible odds. Vincent Torrino had spent his entire adult life seeking justice for his murdered family. And in this forest clearing, with the diamond that had authenticated decades of treason now safely in federal custody, that justice had finally been achieved. But as they prepared to leave the scene, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something important was still unresolved. The conspiracy had been exposed, the primary players captured or killed, and the evidence secured. Yet Vincent's expression suggested that his long journey was not quite complete. 6 months later, Robert stood in the same forest clearing where Vincent had confronted Colonel Volkov, but the scene was transformed. Where once there had been violence and bloodshed, now there was peace and remembrance. A bronze memorial plaque had been installed on a granite boulder, its surface gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. The inscription was simple but powerful, in memory of the Torrino family, Giuseppe, Maria, Antonio, Marco, and Vincent, who gave their lives in service to their country. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. Vincent had died 3 weeks after Volkov's capture, not from violence, but from a heart condition that doctors said had been weakened by 20 years of constant stress and fear. He had lived just long enough to see the conspiracy fully exposed, the corrupted officials arrested, and his family's true story told to the world. Robert placed a small American flag beside the memorial plaque, a gesture that had become a monthly ritual. Detective Sarah Chen stood beside him, now promoted to lead a federal task force investigating foreign intelligence operations. Their relationship had deepened from professional collaboration to something more personal, built on shared respect for Vincent's courage and determination. "The photography exhibition opens next month," Sarah said, referring to Robert's comprehensive documentation of the Torrino case. Vincent would have been proud to see his family's story told with such care. "He spent 20 years making sure the truth survived," Robert replied. "The least I could do was make sure it was told properly." The exhibition, titled Hidden Patriots, the Torrino Family's Story, would travel to museums across the country, ensuring that the family's sacrifice was remembered by future generations. But more importantly, The evidence they had gathered had led to the conviction of over 30 individuals involved in the conspiracy, including several high-ranking government officials and foreign agents. Dr. Margaret Whitmore had published a comprehensive historical analysis showing how the Torrino case represented just one example of foreign intelligence penetration that had been occurring for decades. Her research, supported by Vincent's evidence, had led to significant reforms in federal counterintelligence procedures. As they walked back through the forest toward their car, Robert reflected on how a simple hiking trip had led him into the center of one of the most significant espionage cases in American history. But more than that, it had introduced him to people of extraordinary courage, who had been willing to sacrifice everything for principles larger than themselves. "Sarah," Robert said as they reached the car, "Vincent asked me to do something before he died. Something I haven't told you about. What was that?" Robert pulled out a small wooden box, identical to the one that had held the Torrino family diamond. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn smooth by decades of wear, Vincent's wedding ring. He was married briefly in his 20s, before he went into hiding. His wife thought he was dead. He asked me to return this to her, to let her know that he never stopped loving her, and that he understood why she had to move on with her life. Sarah took the ring gently, understanding the weight of the responsibility Robert was accepting. "Do you know where to find her?" "Vincent left me everything I need. Her name is Catherine Morrison now. She lives in Portland, has 2 children, and a husband who loves her. Vincent just wanted her to know that his last thoughts were of the happiness she had given him." Before his world fell apart, as they drove away from the memorial site, Robert realized that Vincent's story was finally complete. Justice had been served, truth had been preserved, and love had been honored. The Torrino family's sacrifice had not been in vain, and their legacy would inspire others to choose courage over convenience, principle over self-preservation. The storm that had driven Robert to seek shelter in an abandoned mansion had ended long ago. But the light that had emerged from that darkness would shine for generations to come. But that was not the end of the story. 3 days into Robert's initial investigation, before the dramatic confrontation in the forest, events had unfolded differently than anyone realized. While Robert and Detective Chen believed they were conducting a careful investigation, they were actually being watched by people who had been monitoring the mansion for decades. Marcus Volkov's lieutenant, Elena Kozlov, had been stationed in the area for over a year, using sophisticated surveillance equipment to monitor anyone who might discover the mansion's secrets. From her concealed observation post 2 miles away, she had watched Robert's arrival during the storm and immediately recognized the threat he represented. Elena was not like the other members of Volkov's organization. Where they were motivated by money or ideology, she was driven by something far more personal, a burning desire for revenge that had consumed her life for over 20 years. Her father, Dmitry Kozlov, had been a rival crime boss who had been eliminated by Giuseppe Torrino in 1995, long before the Torrino family had begun cooperating with federal authorities. The encrypted communication device Elena used to report Robert's presence was a marvel of modern technology, virtually undetectable by standard government surveillance methods. Her message to Volkov was brief but urgent. "American photographer has discovered the site, who appears to be conducting systematic documentation. Recommend immediate containment." Volkov's response came within minutes. "Monitor but do not engage. Subject may lead us to additional evidence we have not located. Maintain surveillance and report all activities." Elena had spent her adult life learning patience, but watching Robert photograph evidence that could expose her father's killer tested every limit of her self-control. Through high-powered telescopes and directional microphones, she monitored Robert's discovery of the bloody ledger, his phone conversations with Detective Chen, and his growing understanding of what had happened to the Torrino family. But it was when Robert found Vincent's journal that Elena realized the true scope of what she was witnessing. Vincent Torrino was still alive, still gathering evidence, still working to expose the very people who had eliminated Elena's father. The irony was almost too perfect. The son of her family's killer had become the key to finally achieving the revenge she had sought for decades. Elena's surveillance equipment captured not just Robert's actions, but his emotional responses to what he was discovering. She watched him carefully photograph each page of Vincent's journal, saw the growing determination in his movements as he understood the significance of what he had found. This was not just a curious hiker who had stumbled upon something interesting. This was a man who was becoming personally invested in uncovering the truth. The decision to let Robert continue his investigation rather than eliminating him immediately was calculated and strategic. Elena understood that Robert's professional photography skills and his obvious dedication to documenting evidence could be useful. If he could be allowed to gather additional evidence before being eliminated, that evidence could then be recovered and used to finally locate Vincent Torrino. Elena's own investigation had stalled years earlier when she lost Vincent's trail. Despite resources provided by various criminal organizations that shared her desire to eliminate the last surviving Torrino, Vincent had proven remarkably skilled at remaining hidden. But Robert's arrival changed the dynamic completely. If Vincent was indeed still alive and still monitoring the mansion, Robert's presence would almost certainly draw him out of hiding. The surveillance patterns Elena established around the mansion were military precise, using motion sensors, infrared cameras, and acoustic monitoring equipment that could detect a whispered conversation from over half a mile away. She documented not just Robert's activities, but every vehicle that passed on nearby roads, every aircraft that flew overhead, and every change in local wildlife behavior that might indicate the presence of other observers. When Detective Chen arrived to assist Robert's investigation, Elena immediately recognized the escalation this represented. Chen's law enforcement background and her obvious familiarity with the Torrino case suggested that Robert had already shared significant information with federal authorities. This meant that Elena's window for completing her mission was rapidly closing. Elena's report to Volkov that evening contained a recommendation for immediate action. Target has established contact with law enforcement. Federal involvement is likely within 48 hours. Recommend moving to active containment phase before investigation expands beyond our ability to control. But Volkov's response surprised her. Maintain observation only. Federal involvement may force Vincent Torrino to reveal himself in order to protect evidence. Our patience for 20 years has been rewarded with this opportunity. Do not compromise it through premature action. Elena understood Volkov's reasoning, but her personal agenda made patience increasingly difficult. Every hour that Robert continued his investigation brought him closer to evidence that would paint the Torrino family as heroes rather than criminals. Elena's entire life had been built around the belief that Giuseppe Torrino was a murderer who had destroyed her family. The possibility that he might instead be remembered as a patriot who died serving his country was unbearable. As night fell on Robert's third day at the mansion, Elena made a decision that would alter the course of events for everyone involved. Rather than continuing to follow Volkov's orders to observe and wait, she would take independent action to ensure that the truth about Giuseppe Torrino remained buried forever. Elena's understanding of the criminal networks that had operated in the region for decades was comprehensive and deeply personal. Her research into her father's death had led her through layers of organized crime history that most law enforcement agencies had never fully penetrated. The Kozlov crime family tree she had assembled over 20 years was a masterwork of investigative analysis, showing connections between old rivalries and current threats that painted a picture far more complex than anyone realized. The Russian crime syndicates that had emerged in the 1990s were not simply transplanted organizations from the former Soviet Union. They were sophisticated, networks that had deliberately infiltrated and merged with existing American criminal enterprises, creating hybrid organizations that combined traditional organized crime with modern intelligence capabilities. Elena's father, Dmitry Kozlov, had been one of the first to recognize this evolution and attempt to resist it. According to Elena's research, Giuseppe Torrino's elimination of Dmitry Kozlov in 1995 had not been a simple territorial dispute between rival crime families. It had been part of a larger consolidation effort orchestrated by Russian intelligence services to eliminate independent operators who might interfere with their long-term infiltration goals. Giuseppe had been used as an unwitting tool in this process, believing he was simply defending his family's interests when he was actually advancing a foreign agenda. The irony that Giuseppe had later become an FBI informant working against the very forces that had manipulated him into killing Elena's father was not lost on her. But it did nothing to diminish her desire for revenge. If anything, it made her hatred more focused and pure. Giuseppe Torrino had been both victim and perpetrator, used by forces he didn't understand to destroy innocent people, then discarded when he was no longer useful. Elena's organizational chart showed how the networks had evolved over the decades since her father's death. What had begun as relatively simple criminal enterprises had transformed into sophisticated operations that combined drug trafficking, arms dealing, human trafficking, and cybercrime under the umbrella of intelligence operations. The profit motive that had traditionally driven organized crime had been supplemented by ideological and strategic objectives that served foreign governments. Detective Chen's arrival at the mansion represented a development that Elena had anticipated but hoped to avoid. Chen's law enforcement background meant she would have access to federal databases and investigative resources that could quickly expand the scope of the investigation beyond Elena's ability to control. More importantly, Chen's obvious competence and dedication suggested she would not be easily intimidated or misdirected. Elena's intelligence on detective Chen revealed a law enforcement officer with an exemplary record and a reputation for pursuing cases with relentless determination. Chen had been involved in several high-profile organized crime investigations, and her methods suggested she understood the sophisticated nature of modern criminal networks. This made her a formidable opponent who would need to be neutralized before she could fully grasp the implications of what Robert had discovered. The communication intercepts Elena had been monitoring showed that Chen was already coordinating with federal authorities, sharing information about the Torrino case and requesting access to classified files. This federal involvement represented a point of no return. Once the investigation reached that level, Elena's window for independent action would close permanently. Elena's analysis of the historical context revealed patterns that most investigators had missed. The 1990s organized crime wars had not been random violence between competing groups. There had been a systematic process of consolidation and elimination designed to create a criminal infrastructure that could support intelligence operations. Families like the Kozlovs, who maintained independence and resisted integration into larger networks, had been systematically eliminated. The Torrino family's transformation from criminals to federal informants represented a threat to this entire system. If Giuseppe Torrino could successfully expose the foreign intelligence operations that had infiltrated American organized crime, it would unravel decades of carefully constructed networks. Elena understood why Volkov had been so determined to eliminate the entire family. It wasn't just about protecting current operations, but about preserving an entire strategic framework. But Elena's personal investment in the case went beyond understanding strategic implications. She had dedicated her life to avenging her father's death, and the discovery that Giuseppe Torrino might be remembered as a hero rather than a criminal represented a fundamental threat to everything she had believed for 20 years. If the truth about the Torrino family became public, it would not only clear Giuseppe's name, but might also reveal that Elena's father had been killed as part of a foreign intelligence operation. The possibility that her father's death had been orchestrated by the very people Elena now worked for was a realization she could not allow herself to fully acknowledge. It would mean that her entire adult life had been spent serving the interests of her father's real killers while pursuing revenge against their victim. Elena's decision to act independently of Volkov's orders was driven by this internal conflict. She needed to eliminate the evidence Robert was gathering, not just to protect current operations, but to protect her own psychological stability. The truth about the Torrino family could not be allowed to emerge because Elena could not survive the revelation of what the truth would mean about her own choices. The basement vault that Robert and Detective Chen finally accessed on their fourth day contained revelations that would reshape everyone's understanding of the case. The steel safety deposit box they discovered was a marvel of engineering, designed to survive not just fire and explosion, but decades of environmental exposure. Inside, wrapped in waterproof materials and organized with military precision, were documents that told the complete story of Vincent Torrino's 20-year mission. The birth certificates and identity documents revealed the scope of Vincent's preparation for a life in hiding. He had created not just one false identity, but a complete network of alternate personas, each with supporting documentation that would pass all but the most sophisticated background checks. The level of detail was extraordinary. Social security numbers obtained through deceased infants, educational transcripts from schools that had been destroyed in natural disasters, employment records with companies that had long since gone out of business. But it was the offshore account information that truly demonstrated the strategic thinking behind Vincent's long-term planning. Rather than simply hiding from his family's killers, Vincent had been systematically draining the financial resources of the criminal networks that had destroyed his family. Using his insider knowledge of how these organizations moved money, he had been intercepting transfers, redirecting payments, and gradually bankrupting the very people who thought they had eliminated all threats to their operation. The account statements showed transfers totaling over $40 million over 2 decades, money that had been stolen from arms dealers, drug traffickers, and corrupt officials who believed their financial networks were secure. Vincent had not just been gathering evidence, he had been conducting economic warfare against his enemies, using their own greed and corruption against them. Detective Chen studied the documents with growing amazement. Vincent wasn't just surviving in hiding. He was actively dismantling their operations from the inside. This is the most sophisticated long-term investigation I've ever seen. Robert photographed each document carefully, understanding that he was documenting one of the most remarkable stories of patient determination in modern history. 20 years of living every day, knowing that discovery meant death, but never stopping the fight for justice. The evidence linking corrupt officials to the cover-up was equally comprehensive. Vincent had somehow obtained copies of classified federal communications, financial records from numbered Swiss accounts, and surveillance photographs that proved coordination between American officials and foreign intelligence services. The scope of the corruption was staggering, involving dozens of individuals across multiple government agencies. Among the most damning evidence were communications between Judge Harrison Caldwell and various criminal organizations, showing that Caldwell had been taking bribes for over 15 years in exchange for favorable rulings and advanced warning of federal investigations. The judge, who had been overseeing many of the cases related to organized crime, had actually been working for the criminals he was supposed to be prosecuting. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was a series of photographs showing high-level meetings between American military officials and arms dealers who were selling advanced weapons technology to hostile foreign governments. The meetings had taken place at luxury resorts, private jets, and exclusive clubs, documented by Vincent's carefully positioned surveillance equipment. How did he get access to all of this? Chen asked, studying photographs that showed meetings she was certain had been classified at the highest levels. "Look at the timestamps," Robert replied, noting the dates on the surveillance photos. These were taken over a period of years, which means Vincent had to maintain surveillance on dozens of targets simultaneously. He wasn't just one person gathering evidence, he was running an entire counterintelligence operation by himself. The realization of what Vincent had accomplished was both inspiring and heartbreaking. For 20 years, while federal agencies had been infiltrated and compromised, while corrupt officials had been protecting the very criminals they were supposed to investigate, one young man had been single-handedly documenting the truth and preparing for the day when justice might finally be possible. The offshore account information also revealed something else. Vincent had been supporting other victims of the conspiracy. Families of murdered informants, witnesses who had been forced into hiding, even some of the federal agents who had tried to investigate the corruption and been transferred or demoted as a result. Vincent had used the money he'd stolen from criminal networks to provide a safety net for people who had suffered because they tried to do the right thing. He was protecting people, Chen said quietly, reviewing bank transfer records that showed regular payments to dozens of individuals. All these years, he wasn't just gathering evidence. He was trying to help other victims survive long enough to see justice done. As they continued examining the contents of the vault, both Robert and Chen began to understand that Vincent's mission had been far more comprehensive than simple revenge or even justice for his family. He had been conducting a one-man war against an entire system of corruption, using every skill and resource at his disposal to protect not just himself, but everyone else who had been victimized by the conspiracy that had destroyed his family. The sealed federal court documents Vincent had somehow obtained revealed the most heartbreaking aspect of his 20-year journey. The court testimony transcripts showed that Vincent had been scheduled to testify before a federal grand jury in April 2003, just weeks after his family's murder. His testimony would have exposed not just the Russian intelligence operations, but the American officials who had been facilitating them for decades. The transcripts contained Vincent's prepared statements, written in his careful handwriting when he was still just 17 years old. His words revealed a young man who understood the enormous responsibility he carried and was prepared to sacrifice everything to fulfill it. "I know that speaking the truth about what my family discovered will put me in danger for the rest of my life," Vincent had written. "But my parents taught me that some things are more important than personal safety. The security of our country is one of those things." Detective Chen studied the timeline of events with growing horror. Vincent was supposed to testify on March 25th, 2003. His family was killed on March 20. The timing wasn't coincidental. Someone with access to federal court schedules leaked the information to ensure Vincent would never have the chance to speak. U.S. Attorney Patricia Rivers, who had been Vincent's original contact within the federal system, had submitted her own statement to the court, expressing her concerns about security breaches within the investigation. Her memo, dated just days before the Torrino family's murder, warned that information about our key witness has been compromised, and we have reason to believe that hostile actors are aware of the planned testimony. Rivers had recommended moving Vincent and his family into immediate protective custody, but her request had been denied by superior officers who claimed that insufficient evidence of immediate threat existed to justify such drastic measures. The denial had been signed by Deputy Director Thomas Walsh, whose name appeared on several other documents in Vincent's collection, documents that suggested Walsh had been receiving payments from foreign intelligence services for over a decade, the federal protection program that should have safeguarded Vincent and his family had been systematically compromised from within. Vincent's evidence showed that safe house locations were being provided to hostile actors, that witness identities were being sold to the highest bidders, and that federal marshals assigned to protection details were sometimes working directly for the criminals they were supposed to be guarding against. The entire system was corrupt, Robert observed, photographing page after page of evidence that showed how thoroughly foreign intelligence had penetrated American law enforcement. Vincent wasn't just fighting individual criminals, he was fighting an entire network that had infected every level of government. The most devastating revelation came in the form of recorded phone conversations between Vincent and Attorney Rivers in the weeks before his family's murder. The recordings showed a 17-year-old boy trying to convince federal officials that his family was in immediate danger, while those same officials dismissed his concerns as paranoia. "Mr. Torrino," Rivers could be heard saying in one recording, "you must understand that the federal government cannot disrupt entire families' lives based on unsubstantiated fears. We have protocols in place to ensure witness safety." Vincent's response revealed a maturity far beyond his years. "Ms. Rivers, with respect, your protocols have been compromised. The people who want to silence my family have been planning this for months. They know about the grand jury, they know about my testimony, and they know exactly how to circumvent your protection measures." The recordings continued for several more conversations, showing Vincent desperately trying to convince federal authorities to take seriously threats that he could see clearly, but they refused to acknowledge. His final conversation with Rivers took place just hours before his family was killed. "Vincent," Rivers had said, "if you're truly concerned about your safety, perhaps we should postpone your testimony until better security arrangements can be made." "No," Vincent had replied firmly. "Every day we wait is another day these people have to cover their tracks and eliminate evidence. My family agreed to do this because it was the right thing to do. We're not backing down now." The court transcripts also revealed that Vincent's planned testimony would have exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of multiple government agencies. His evidence would have implicated not just corrupt FBI agents like Torres, but officials in the CIA, DEA, and even the State Department who had been facilitating intelligence operations that betrayed American interests. Vincent was going to bring down dozens of people with a single testimony, Chen said, understanding now why the conspiracy had been so desperate to silence him. His death wasn't just about protecting current operations. It was about protecting decades of previous crimes, the realization that Vincent had spent 20 years living with the knowledge that his family had died because federal officials had failed to protect them added another layer of tragedy to his story. He had not just lost his family, he had lost his faith in the very system he was trying to save. The discovery of stolen Renaissance paintings hidden within the mansion's walls opened an entirely new dimension to the conspiracy that Robert and Detective Chen were uncovering. The artwork, carefully preserved behind false panels that had protected them from decades of weather and neglect, represented not just enormous financial value but evidence of international crimes that spanned continents and centuries. Robert's background in art photography proved invaluable as he documented each piece with the precision required for authentication. The paintings were masterworks by artists whose names were legendary. A previously unknown Caravaggio depicting a biblical scene, a small but exquisite Leonardo da Vinci study for a larger work, and several pieces by Dutch masters that had been reported stolen from European museums decades earlier. This Renaissance painting authentication documents that Vincent had compiled told a story of systematic art theft that went far beyond simple criminal enterprise. These were not random thefts motivated by profit, but carefully planned operations designed to acquire specific pieces that could be used as collateral in international arms deals and political negotiations, detective. Chen studied the authentication papers with growing amazement. These aren't just stolen paintings. They're being used as a kind of international currency. Look at these transaction records. This Caravaggio was traded for surface-to-air missiles. This Da Vinci was used to secure safe passage for arms. Dealers through international borders. The connection between the Torrino family's criminal activities and international art theft revealed the sophisticated nature of the networks they had been investigating. Giuseppe Torrino's legitimate businesses had included several art galleries and auction houses, providing perfect cover for moving stolen artwork through international markets without attracting attention from customs officials or art recovery specialists. But Vincent's documentation showed that his father had not initially understood the true scope of what he was facilitating. Giuseppe had believed he was simply helping to move valuable artwork for wealthy clients who preferred to avoid taxes and export restrictions. It wasn't until FBI agents approached him that he learned the paintings were being used to finance weapons sales to terrorist organizations and hostile foreign governments. The introduction of Interpol agent David Richter added an international dimension to the investigation that neither Robert nor Chen had anticipated. Richter had been tracking the stolen art network for over 15 years, following a trail of missing masterpieces from museums and private collections across Europe and Asia. The Torrino collection represents the largest cache of stolen art we've discovered in decades, Richter explained during a secure video conference from his office in Lyon. Some of these pieces have been missing for over 40 years. We had assumed they were lost forever or destroyed. Agent Richter's files revealed that the art theft network operated with a sophistication that rivaled government intelligence services. Stolen pieces were carefully documented, authenticated by corrupt experts, and then moved through a pipeline that included private collectors, offshore storage facilities, and ultimately into the hands of criminal organizations that use them as untraceable assets. Art is the perfect criminal currency, Richter continued. It's portable, holds its value across decades, and can be moved across international borders with minimal documentation. A single painting worth $50 million can finance an entire arms deal without leaving any of the financial traces that modern banking regulations would detect. Vincent's evidence showed that Volkov's network had been using the Torrino family's art expertise to authenticate and value stolen pieces, ensuring that criminal organizations weren't being cheated in their transactions. Giuseppe's knowledge of Renaissance art had made him invaluable to operations that required precise valuations of artwork being used as collateral. The billion-dollar scope of the art smuggling operation became clear as Robert and Chen examined Vincent's financial analysis. Over 2 decades, the network had moved artwork worth an estimated $1.2 billion, using the proceeds to finance weapons sales, political corruption, and intelligence operations across multiple continents. Robert's art photography expertise became crucial for establishing the authenticity of pieces that had been considered lost to history. His detailed documentation revealed subtle details of brushwork, aging patterns, and restoration marks that proved these were indeed the original masterpieces, not sophisticated forgeries. "This changes everything," Chen observed as she reviewed the scope of the evidence. "We're not just looking at a domestic conspiracy anymore. This is an international criminal enterprise that has been operating for decades, using American criminal networks to facilitate crimes all over the world." The discovery that current criminal activity involved active art smuggling operations meant that Volkov's network was still moving stolen artwork through the same channels that had been established decades earlier. Vincent's evidence included recent transaction records showing that paintings stolen from museums in Iraq and Syria were being moved through networks that traced back to the original Torrino connections. Vincent wasn't just documenting historical crimes, Robert realized. He was tracking ongoing operations, gathering real-time intelligence on current criminal activity. That's why Volkov was so desperate to find him. Vincent had evidence of crimes that were still in progress. The international implications of the art theft network meant that Vincent's evidence would be crucial not just for prosecuting domestic corruption, but for dismantling criminal enterprises that operated across multiple countries and jurisdictions. The exposure of Judge Harrison Caldwell's 20-year history of corruption represented perhaps the most devastating blow to the American justice system that Vincent's evidence would deliver. The judge's personal correspondence, which Vincent had somehow obtained through methods that demonstrated remarkable patience and skill, revealed a pattern of judicial corruption that had protected criminal enterprises while destroying the lives of innocent people who had tried to seek justice. Judge Caldwell's letters to various crime family representatives showed a man who had completely abandoned any pretense of judicial integrity in favor of personal enrichment. His correspondence revealed not just individual instances of bribery, but a systematic approach to corrupting the legal system that had protected criminal operations for decades. Your Honor, read one letter from a representative of the Kozlov crime family. The sentencing recommendations you provided for the Rodriguez case were extremely helpful. The suggested plea agreement will ensure that our operations remain undisturbed while maintaining the appearance of successful prosecution. Caldwell's response demonstrated the calculated nature of his corruption. I have reviewed the case files you provided and agree that a plea arrangement serves everyone's interests. Mr. Rodriguez will receive a sentence that satisfies public demand for justice while ensuring that his testimony cannot damage ongoing operations. The recommended 18-month sentence should be sufficient. Detective Chen studied the correspondence with growing disgust. Caldwell wasn't just taking bribes for individual favors. He was actively coordinating with criminal organizations to ensure that prosecutions served their interests rather than justice. The scope of Caldwell's corruption became clear as Robert and Chen examined decades of correspondence. The judge had been involved in fixing not just criminal cases, but civil lawsuits that could have exposed criminal activities, federal investigations that threatened corrupt officials, and even family court cases involving the children of criminal organization members. Vincent's evidence showed that Caldwell had received over $3 million in bribes over 15 years, money that had been carefully laundered through real estate investments, offshore accounts, and payments to family members for fictitious consulting services. But the financial corruption was secondary to the institutional damage that Caldwell's actions had caused. The revelation that Caldwell had personally ordered the elimination of the Torrino family came through correspondence that was chilling in its casual discussion of murder. In a letter dated just 2 weeks before the family's death, Caldwell had written to Volkov, "The Torrino situation requires immediate resolution. Their planned testimony threatens not just current operations, but decades of carefully constructed arrangements. I'm authorizing whatever measures are necessary to prevent this information from reaching federal prosecutors." Volkov's response had been equally direct. "Your Honor, the situation will be resolved permanently. There will be no surviving witnesses, no remaining evidence, and no future complications from this source." The correspondence revealed that Caldwell had been instrumental in ensuring that federal protection for the Torrino family was inadequate, and that information about their whereabouts was provided to hostile actors. The judge had used his position to access classified federal communications and had passed sensitive information about witness protection programs directly to the criminals. Those programs were designed to protect against. Caldwell wasn't just corrupt, Robert observed as he photographed the damning correspondence. He was actively working for foreign intelligence services, using his judicial position to protect espionage operations. The evidence Vincent had assembled against Caldwell included documentation of judicial decisions that had dismissed cases against arms dealers, technology transfer violations, and money laundering operations that facilitated foreign intelligence activities. Over 2 decades, Caldwell had systematically dismantled legal protections designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration that had destroyed Vincent's family. Chen's analysis of Caldwell's judicial record revealed patterns that should have attracted attention years earlier. Look at his sentencing patterns. Every case involving international crime syndicates resulted in minimal sentences or dismissed charges. Every case involving potential witnesses against these organizations resulted in maximum penalties. The judge's blackmail materials, which Vincent had somehow obtained, showed that Caldwell himself was being controlled through evidence of his corruption. Foreign intelligence services had been systematically gathering compromising information on American officials, then using that information to ensure continued cooperation even when officials might have wanted to withdraw from criminal activities. Caldwell couldn't stop even if he wanted to, Chen realized. Once he accepted the first bribe, they had enough evidence to destroy him. He became a permanent asset for foreign intelligence operations. The institutional betrayal represented by Caldwell's corruption extended beyond individual cases to the fundamental integrity of the American legal system. Citizens who had sought justice through the courts had instead been victimized by a system that had been designed to protect the very criminals they were seeking relief from. Vincent's evidence against Caldwell included not just financial records and correspondence, but audio recordings of conversations where the judge had discussed specific cases and how to manipulate legal proceedings to achieve desired outcomes. The recordings revealed a man who had lost any connection to the principles of justice he had sworn to uphold. Immediate people who trusted the system to protect them were being betrayed by the very officials who were supposed to ensure justice, Robert said, understanding now the scope of the institutional corruption that Vincent had spent 20 years documenting. Elena Kozlov's death list, written in her careful handwriting on expensive stationery, represented the culmination of a personal vendetta that had consumed her entire adult life. The handwritten document contained not just names, but detailed plans for elimination that revealed a sophisticated understanding of assassination techniques and operational security. Vincent Torrino's name appeared at the top of the list, followed by Robert Hayes and Detective Sarah Chen. But the complete roster included over 30 individuals, who Elena considered obstacles to her mission of revenge. Elena's personal history with the Torrino family went beyond the simple fact that Giuseppe had killed her father. Her research into the events of 1995 had revealed layers of betrayal and manipulation that had destroyed not just her father, but her entire understanding of family loyalty and criminal honor. Dmitry Kozlov had not been simply eliminated by a rival crime boss. He had been deliberately set up by people he trusted, manipulated into a confrontation that he could not survive. The revelation that Giuseppe Torrino had been as much a victim as a perpetrator in her father's death was information that Elena could not psychologically process. Her entire adult identity had been built around the belief that Giuseppe was a cold-blooded killer who had destroyed her family for profit. The possibility that he had been manipulated by the same foreign intelligence services that now employed Elena threatened the foundation of everything she believed about herself and her mission. Elena's death list revealed the sophisticated assassination network she had assembled over 2 decades of preparation. Each name was accompanied by detailed intelligence about the target's habits, security arrangements, family members, and vulnerabilities. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing that Elena had been conducting surveillance operations for years, gathering information that would allow her to strike quickly and efficiently when the time came. Vincent Torrino's entry in the death list showed that Elena had been tracking him for over a decade, documenting his movements, his safe houses, and his methods of remaining hidden. But her intelligence on Vincent also revealed something unexpected, grudging respect for his skills and dedication. Elena's notes describe Vincent as a worthy opponent who has honored his family through his persistence, even as she planned his death. Robert's entry in the death list was more recent but equally detailed. Elena had been monitoring his activities since his first day at the mansion, documenting his photographer's habits, his relationship with Detective Chen, and his growing understanding of the conspiracy he had uncovered. Her assessment of Robert was clinically professional. Subject demonstrates emotional investment in outcome. This attachment makes him predictable, but also dangerous if cornered. Detective Chen's profile revealed that Elena had been researching her background for months, even before Chen became involved in the current investigation. Elena had somehow obtained access to Chen's law enforcement records, her case files, and even personal information about her family and relationships. The thoroughness of the intelligence gathering suggested that Elena had resources within law enforcement agencies. The revelation of Elena's plan to eliminate all witnesses was not just about protecting current operations. It was about ensuring that her father's memory would not be tainted by revelations about his true role in the events of 1995. Elena's psychological profile, which she had unconsciously revealed through her detailed planning documents, showed a woman who could not survive the cognitive dissonance of learning that she had spent 20 years serving the people who had actually destroyed her family. Elena's sophisticated assassination network included contacts in multiple countries, access to military-grade weapons and surveillance equipment, and financial resources that allowed her to operate independently of Volkov's organization when necessary. Her death list revealed that she had been planning to eliminate witnesses not just to protect the conspiracy, but to protect her own psychological stability. The discovery of Elena's current location, revealed through surveillance footage that Vincent had obtained, showed that she had established a base of operations within 20 miles of the mansion site. Her facility was equipped with communications equipment, weapons storage, and detailed maps of the area that showed she had been preparing for a major operation for months. Robert and Chen realized that Elena represented a threat that was qualitatively different from the other members of Volkov's organization. Where the others were motivated by ideology or financial gain, Elena was driven by personal obsession that made her both more dangerous and more unpredictable than professional criminals. Elena isn't just trying to eliminate witnesses, Chen observed as she studied the death list. She's trying to eliminate the truth itself. She can't allow evidence to emerge that would force her to confront what really happened to her father. The psychological analysis of Elena's writings revealed a woman who had constructed an elaborate fantasy about her father's death that allowed her to function as an adult. The revelation that Giuseppe Torrino had been manipulated, rather than acting independently, would force Elena to acknowledge that her entire adult life had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. Vincent's message warning Robert and Chen about Elena's immediate plans came through a coded communication system that he had established for exactly this kind of emergency. His warning was urgent and specific. Elena Kozlov has accelerated her timeline. She plans to eliminate all witnesses within 48 hours, then disappear permanently. You are both in immediate danger. The GPS tracking device that led to the final confrontation was a piece of technology that Vincent had been carrying for over a decade. A sophisticated unit that could transmit his location even when all other communications were compromised. But the signal that Robert and Detective Chen followed through the mountain wilderness was not coming from Vincent by choice. It was a distress beacon that activated automatically when Vincent's biometric monitors detected that he was under extreme physical stress. Vincent was being held in a remote forest compound that had been constructed specifically for interrogation and elimination operations. The facility, hidden in an abandoned mining area 30 miles from the mansion site, was virtually invisible from aerial surveillance and could only be accessed through treacherous mountain trails that discouraged casual exploration. Robert and Chen's dangerous journey to reach Vincent's location tested every skill they had developed during their investigation. Moving through wilderness terrain while being actively hunted by Elena's assassination teams required a combination of survival expertise, tactical awareness, and simple determination that pushed both of them beyond their normal capabilities. The compound where Vincent was being held represented the culmination of decades of preparation by criminal organizations that had learned to operate in environments where traditional law enforcement could not easily reach them. The abandoned mining facility had been converted into a sophisticated base of operations, complete with communications equipment, weapons storage, and interrogation facilities that could hold multiple prisoners for extended periods. Chen's tactical planning for the rescue mission drew on her law enforcement training, but the situation required improvisation that went far beyond standard police procedures. "We're not conducting an arrest operation," she explained to Robert as they prepared their approach. "We're conducting a military-style rescue mission against a fortified position held by professional killers." The discovery that Vincent had been tortured for information about his hidden evidence caches was revealed through surveillance footage that Elena's teams had been recording for their own operational purposes. The recording showed that Vincent had endured days of systematic abuse designed to break his will and force him to reveal the locations of evidence that could still threaten the conspiracy. But even under extreme duress, Vincent had maintained the discipline and courage that had sustained him through 20 years of living in constant danger. The interrogation recordings showed a man who refused to betray the mission that had defined his adult life, even when facing inevitable death. Robert's emotional preparation for the possibility of violence and personal sacrifice represented a transformation that he could never have anticipated when he first sought shelter from a mountain storm. The mild-mannered wilderness photographer had been forced to confront realities of evil and corruption that challenged every assumption he had held about justice and moral order. "I've spent my career documenting the beauty of wild places," Robert told Chen as they prepared for what might be their final mission together. "I never thought I'd have to document something like this, but Vincent's story deserves to be told, even if telling it cost us everything." The compound's defensive positions were designed by people who understood both military tactics and criminal operations. Multiple layers of security, overlapping fields of fire, and carefully planned escape routes made the facility nearly impregnable to conventional assault. But Robert's photographer's eye for detail and Chen's law enforcement experience allowed them to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The approach to the compound required moving through terrain that was actively monitored by motion sensors, infrared cameras, and human sentries who had been trained to detect and eliminate intruders. Robert and Chen spent hours moving just a few hundred yards, timing their movements to avoid detection and coordinating their advance with the precision of a military operation. When they finally reached a position where they could observe Vincent's captivity, the sight that greeted them was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Vincent, despite obvious signs of torture and abuse, was still refusing to cooperate with his captors. His courage in the face of certain death represented the same kind of heroism that his family had shown 20 years earlier. The realization that this rescue mission would determine not just Vincent's fate, but the fate of decades of evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy, added enormous weight to every decision Robert and Chen made. They were not just trying to save one man's life, they were trying to ensure that the truth about foreign intelligence penetration of American institutions would finally be revealed. Elena's presence at the compound as the primary interrogator added a personal dimension to the confrontation that neither Robert nor Chen had fully anticipated. This was not just a rescue mission against professional criminals, it was a Confrontation with someone whose personal obsession had made her willing to destroy anyone who threatened her. Psychological construction of reality. The final approach to Vincent's location required Robert and Chen to move through areas where they would be completely exposed to enemy fire, relying on timing, luck, and the element of surprise to reach their objective before Eleanor's teams could respond effectively. Vincent's final letter, discovered weeks after the confrontation at the mining compound, provided closure not just for the case, but for the decades of pain and sacrifice that had defined his extraordinary life. The letter had been hidden in a safety deposit box that could only be accessed after Vincent's death, ensuring that his final thoughts would survive even if he did not. The handwritten document, composed in Vincent's careful script on simple notebook paper, began with words that captured the essence of his 20-year mission. If you are reading this, it means that my family's story has finally been told, and that the truth they died protecting has at last been revealed. I could not have asked for a better ending to a journey that began in tragedy, but concludes in justice. Vincent's peaceful death had come not in violence as he had expected for so many years, but surrounded by federal agents and medical personnel who had finally arrived to provide the protection and care that should have been available to his family decades earlier. The rescue mission that Robert and Chen had initiated had succeeded in saving Vincent's life, but his body, weakened by 20 years of stress and the recent torture, had simply given out once he knew that his mission was complete. The confrontation at the mining compound had ended with Elena's capture rather than her death, the outcome that Vincent had specifically requested in his final communications with federal authorities. Elena Kozlov has been as much a victim of this conspiracy as my family was, Vincent had written. She deserves the chance to learn the truth about her father's death and to understand how she was manipulated into serving his real killers. Robert's decision to document Vincent's entire story through a comprehensive photography book represented both a professional challenge and a personal mission that would define the remainder of his career. The book, titled The Torrino Legacy, 20 Years of Courage in the Face of Corruption, would become not just a documentation of one family's sacrifice, but a testament to the power of individual determination to overcome institutional betrayal. Detective Chen's career advancement to lead a federal task force investigating foreign intelligence operations was a direct result of her work on the Torrino case, but more importantly, it represented her commitment to ensuring that the systemic failures that had enabled the conspiracy would never be repeated. Her new position gave her the authority and resources to investigate other cases where foreign infiltration might have compromised American institutions. The Torrino family name, which had been associated with criminal activity for decades, was formally cleared through federal proceedings that acknowledged their role as patriots who had died serving their country. A joint resolution passed by Congress officially recognized Giuseppe, Maria, Antonio, Marco, and Vincent Torrino as heroes whose sacrifice had protected national security and exposed foreign intelligence operations that threatened American democracy. The mansion site, rather than being forgotten or destroyed, was preserved as a historical landmark that would educate future generations about the reality of foreign intelligence threats and the courage required to resist them. The Torrino Memorial Center, built where the mansion had once stood, became a training facility for law enforcement, officers learning to identify and combat foreign infiltration of American institutions, community, healing from the decades of corruption and violence that had plagued the region. Began with the truth about what had really happened to the Torrino family. Local residents who had lived with rumors and fear for 20 years finally understood that the family they had been taught to avoid had actually been protecting them from threats they never fully comprehended. Robert and Chen's partnership, which had begun as a professional collaboration between a photographer and a detective, had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. Their shared experience of uncovering institutional betrayal and individual heroism had created a bond that extended far beyond their romantic relationship, to encompass a shared commitment to protecting the values that Vincent's family had died defending. The final reflection on ordinary people's capacity for extraordinary courage was embodied not just in Vincent's 20-year mission, but in Robert's decision to risk his life for a truth he had discovered by accident, and in Chen's determination to pursue justice even when it meant confronting corruption within her own profession. Vincent's final letter concluded with words that captured the essence of his family's legacy. "My parents taught me that some principles are worth any sacrifice, and my brothers showed me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. I've tried to honor their memory by ensuring that their sacrifice would not be meaningless. If this story inspires even one person to choose truth over convenience or courage over safety, then everything we endured will have been worthwhile." The letter was signed simply Vincent Torrino, American, a final declaration of the patriotism that had motivated his family's choices and sustained him through 2 decades of danger and isolation. As Robert completed his documentation of the case and prepared for the photography exhibition that would tell Vincent's story to the world, he understood that he had witnessed something remarkable: the power of individual conscience to overcome institutional corruption, and the capacity of ordinary people to choose heroism when history demands it.